acted according to my conscience during this in whenever it was, 35, 36. And that meant disloyalty to this country. But as I've said, I believed it was the right thing in the cause of anti-fascism. I now realize bitterly that this was totally wrong.
But Blunt wasn't working alone. He was part of a network of spies recruited at Cambridge who infiltrated British intelligence. Guy Burgess, Donald Maclean, John Cairncross and Kim Philby, along with Blunt, were known to the KGB as the Magnificent Five. Their tale of treachery is the stuff of spy novels. But what nearly brought the service to its knees was the suggestion of a sixth spy. Sir Roger Hollis, later Director General of MI5. If he had been a traitor, it would have been the most devastating blow of all.
One of the most destructive things that can happen in any organization is to have a conspiracy theorist who becomes obsessed by the hunt for imaginary traitors. That is what Peter Wright does.
Peter Wright was the self-appointed witch-finder general within MI5. He became convinced there was a Soviet mole in the highest ranks of MI5. His belief became an obsession.
When I first joined, I was sent off to see this man. He said I was far too young to be involved in these things, and would I please clear off? So I instantly took a dislike to him. He was known as being an oddball. He was one of those people who think they're the only people who understand something and everybody else should mind their own business. So he was always stopping other people doing things as he knew best. We used to call him the KGB resident, because he was doing more to help the KGB than anybody else, because he stopped us sort of doing our job.
When Wright retired to Tasmania, his vendetta continued. He went public and fed his stories to a journalist.
Right away, you could see he was a very devious character, but then all people in MI5 are. You've got to be. It's destroyed. And anyone who said, oh, I can't tell a lie, I mean, he's no good in MI5, is he?
Later, Chapman Pincher helped Wright to find a publisher for Spycatcher. It became an international bestseller, selling more than 2 million copies. The British government's attempts to stop its publication became a national embarrassment.
I don't feel a bit sympathetic with them.
I mean, Peter Wright was a traitor in their midst. A different traitor, but he was one. The fact that he did it for money rather than anything else is horrific for them.
He caused havoc externally by publishing the book. Internally, the day you retire, you cease to have any currency. His sort of long-term impact was not visible. It's just he was a pain in the arse to deal with when I met him.
But what do the MI5 files say about Sir Roger Hollis? Is there any evidence to show he was a traitor?
The Hollis story was always a really stupid story. Why? Because all the way during the Second World War, Roger Hollis is saying, look, we can't afford to stop paying attention to the Soviet target. We can't afford to stop meticulously recording the identities of all members of the British Communists that we come across. This went far beyond the needs of cover. So, actually, he's somebody who begins to fight the Cold War even before the Cold War.
In the KGB headquarters in Moscow, they were confounded by the publicity surrounding Wright and Hollis. British intelligence knew this because their agent told them.
I remember sitting in the office of the head of the British section of the KGB, and he was reading a British newspaper, accessible, available for him only, because it was never sold in the streets. And he was reading, why is they speaking about Roger Hollis? Such nonsense. Can't understand it. It must be some special English trick directed against us.
Hidden in the thousands of MI5 files are the names of other Britons who did spy for the KGB, some at the heart of the British establishment. The idea that a future British Prime Minister could have been a Russian spy is almost unthinkable. But some in Moscow and London thought the unthinkable. Harold Wilson was a frequent visitor to Moscow as a junior politician and businessman.
The Russians had extraordinary and very foolish hopes for Wilson. But in the mid-1950s, the KGB opens what it calls an agent operational file on Harold Wilson, and he is given a code name. The code name is Olding. They actually hoped to recruit him.
It could be said that Wilson brought suspicion on himself with his choice of friends.
Probably his closest friend in the business world was a man called Joseph Kagan, who manufactured the Ganex Max, which Wilson wore regularly, and who became, thanks to Harold, Sir Joseph Kagan, and later Lord Kagan. Now, between 1964 and 1971, Lord Kagan met a KGB officer every week who would come around to his flat, ask him for the latest gossip. Now, it's not likely that state secrets were passed over, but this is a highly inappropriate friendship for a prime minister.
Friendships like this brought Wilson to the attention of MI5. Wilson's extravagant praise of Soviet leader Khrushchev made things worse. Later, Wilson became suspicious of MI5's interest in him and thought they were leaking stories to the newspapers.
He thought that MI5 was feeding with this information. And he also felt that in the process, MI5 was spying on him. And it bugged his rooms in number 10 Downing Street.
To add to Wilson's suspicions, America's Secret Service were caught up in the atmosphere of distrust.
There was a problem with the CIA, and that is there was a man there called Angleton who was more prone to suspect people even than Peter Wright was. And he had an operation there, codenamed Oat Chief, in which they were looking at the possibility that the British Prime Minister was a Soviet agent. And Angleton became friendly with Wright, and so the two stoked each other up.
On being re-elected in 1974, Wilson declared to a colleague, "There are only 3 people listening, you, me, and MI5.
He believed that behind the picture of one of his most illustrious predecessors, Mr. Gladstone, there was some kind of tiny camera which was observing him. He had always been a conspiracy theorist, and he now begins to believe that the security service is plotting against him. He reaches the stage that when he's going into the gent in number 10, who put his finger to his lips, he would point to the light fitting in the ceiling, he would turn on the taps in order to indicate that it was probably bugged. This is the sad decline of one of the ablest prime ministers there had ever been in Britain.
Harold Wilson died in 1995 after suffering dementia. Only now has Chris Andrew discovered in the MI5 files that perhaps Wilson's suspicions had some substance. He found a file on one Norman John Worthington.
MI5 never told Harold Wilson that it had a file on him. It was given the pseudonym of Worthington. And yet MI5 never investigated Harold Wilson as such. What the file contained was material about Harold Wilson's contacts related to the fact that, as we know from KGB archives, the KGB did attempt to recruit him as an agent. Never had the slightest success in doing so.
Wilson was innocent, but other Labour colleagues weren't. John Stonehouse, a junior minister, is best known for faking his own drowning, leaving his clothes on a Miami beach and running away to Australia with his mistress. The MI5 files reveal that for more than 10 years, Stonehouse was a Czech agent. He was questioned after a defector named him, but never prosecuted for lack of admissible evidence.